Do you struggle with putting yourself first? Are you tired of feeling burnt out and overwhelmed from constantly putting the needs of others before your own? I have created a sacred space that will be available once a week for 10 weeks to learn, dive deep, and create your boundaries to boost your confidence and self-worthiness. Go to www.krista-luna.com and sign up for the Master Your Boundaries course starting in September 2023. And use the code PARANORMAL to get 30% off today on www.crista-luna.com.
Well, check it out, y'all. We got what you need. We're all living in apartments, condos, vans. Well, dude, even you can have a studio in a box. Yes, we can help you with that right here at Blind Knowledge. We work on your budget, and we figure out your measurements. We'll get you the best sound for the best price. Let me know, 877-237-1143 or at blindknowledge.com. Yep.
Welcome to another episode of Paranormal, the New Normal. I'm your host, as always, Jeremy, trying to make this world seem a little more normal. Do I ever succeed? Lord, no. But today we might actually get a little close to that. We'll see. But, of course, I am joined by a guest to do that. And my guest today, and I totally didn't actually have to say it ahead of time, but I'm going to wing it. Michael Spremulli.
Very good.
Yay!
Very good.
Who is a professional astrologer, and more than that too, but we'll get into all what he's into in a few minutes. First things first, how you doing tonight, Michael?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I've had a few, actually, I don't think I've ever had an astrologer on here. I've had I'm trying to think of the name of the freaking career, but I can't think of it. I've had an astrophysicist on, I've had a couple of, but I never had an actual astrologer on. I don't believe. I could be wrong. And to my former guest, if I'm wrong, I apologize. But not on purpose am I saying that. But so I think this would be a good interview, and plus it can get into one of everybody's favorite topics. That has to do with space, but we'll get into that towards the end, I have a feeling. So let me ask you the question I asked everybody the first time.
Go for it.
What got you into this line of work that brings you to a kind of semi-adjacent paranormal field?
Yeah. So it's really wild. Early things that happen in our lives tend to have a huge impact. I remember back in 94 when I was between my undergraduate degree and graduate program, I was working for that year, and someone at work had gifted me a reading with a professional astrologer. And the term professional is very important because, as we'll see as we get into our conversation, professional astrology is nothing like people equate to what is read online and in newspapers and horoscopes and all that. But anyways, went to this professional astrologer's office. I had never had a reading before. I was actually a little nervous because, I was raised in a faith tradition where, astrology is no, bad, don't do that. Well, I had the reading anyways, and it changed my life. Within 5 minutes of being in the room with this person, and she had nothing more than my birth date, time, and location, she proceeded to unpack my entire life up to that point, including struggles that I've had, current situations that I was in, and things that I was thinking about doing moving forward. And I was just aghast. It was much more specific things than what you typically would think of when you think of astrology. Oh, you may be going on a trip, or, you might have a real hard time here. No, we're talking about 6 months ago, you were experiencing a period when you felt conflicted between alliances between two people. I was like, what? How did you get that? So I was intrigued, to say the least. It wasn't at that moment that I decided, hey, I want to become a professional astrologer. But it was at that moment that I said, I want to learn more about this because there's something here. And what's interesting is at that point, I was just about to jump into graduate school to get a master's degree in clinical psychology. Well, you can already see the polar opposites there, with psychology being over here and astrology being over there. So I just kind of filed that reading experience away and then went to graduate school. And then I started buying a book or two on astrology while still getting my master's degree, keeping it, of course, very hush hush because, you didn't want to get thrown out of graduate school for speaking of things that didn't jive with the curriculum. I started gaining interest and momentum over the years, and then eventually learning a lot more through self-training and books, and then taking a couple of courses. And then I got professional astrology software. And that's when the floodgates opened up. That's when I started then doing readings for people, anyone who was within the sound of my voice. I would run their chart and start to perfect my skills. But all the while, this was still kind of underground. And it was weird because I graduated from grad school and then was working in the field of mental health and providing therapy and counseling services. But I kept the astrology to myself because, let's face it, I'll be the first one to say, you tell someone you're an astrologer, people think you're a nut. I mean, that's just the way it is to this day. But what was happening was people started coming to me and saying, hey, you know what you did a few months ago? Could you do that again? Give me a reading. Let me know what's happening in the sky and how things are progressing. And I said, sure, I'd do that. And over time, I had a side hustle without realizing what a side hustle was because the term hadn't been coined yet. So that's what got me on the path to this. And it wasn't until, relatively recently, within the past year or so, that I said, all right, enough is enough. It's time for me to step into this, embrace it, and let the world know that there is something to astrology. And I've discovered that through a specific modality of astrology that we'll get into called vibrational astrology, which actually is evidence-based, meaning there are controlled research studies to back up its claims. The only type of astrology in the world, I might add, that meets this rigorous criteria. So that's sort of the history and thumbnail of what got me into this and where I'm at today.
All right. My second question might throw you for a little more of a loop. My second question, since this is a paranormal show overall,
Sure.
Have you ever had any experiences with anything in the paranormal realm, whether it be spirits, extraterrestrials, cryptids, more than likely, I know, but take your pick.
Well, I don't think I haven't had anything as extreme as extraterrestrials or anything, entities that I was able to see or lay hands on. But there have been numerous times throughout my life that I have felt a presence, for lack of a better term. And I think we all have that capability if we just tune into it. When you're younger, you kind of ignore it and just brush it off. But there have been many, many, many times when I have felt that there's something in the equation or the situation that wasn't visibly observable. And, the only thing I can equate that to is something that, goes beyond the realm that we're in and comes from a higher dimensional realm, time and space.
Well put, I think. And I mean, that's what it is in my mind too. It's another it's an interdimensional type of situation going on here. Trust me, I live with it. But all right. So you said already, and it was going to be my first non-two question. Let's kind of break down what vibrational astrology is, because I've heard the term, but I never really had anybody explain it to me in any
Sure.
way.
And it's important because it really is the cutting edge of modern astrology. So astrology has been around for over 2,000 years. Some roots go back to as early as like 100 or so AD. So it's been around in one way, shape, or form for a long, long time. And traditional astrology, before I get the astrologers coming after me with pitchforks, I'm not knocking traditional methods. They've been around. They've withstood the test of time. They've been here for many, many years. There's something to them. But there was always a part that didn't quite resonate with me, and that is when a lot of times something didn't quite match up according to meanings of the way certain planets are placed in various houses and in various signs. A lot of times an astrologer, because I've had many readings throughout the years, I never miss an opportunity to get a reading from an astrologer. I'll go in, plunk down my money, don't tell them I'm an astrologer, and just kind of see what they do. And I've had some really good readings, and I've had some real crappy readings, to be blunt. But the piece that would always leave me flat and kind of kept me in the astrological closet, for lack of a better term, is that when I'd say something didn't quite fit, the astrologer would go on this series of what I call crowbars, trying to make it fit. Oh, well, we need to look at the sign that's on your rising sign, your rising house cusp. And then we need to find the ruler of that. And then we need to go find the final dispositor. And before you know it, you're running all over the chart, desperately trying to make something fit. That's the part I didn't like about traditional astrology. So when I bumped into VA, it was a little bit of an eye-opener. So how is vibrational astrology different? The original traditional Western forms of astrology, and even some of Eastern forms like Vedic and whatnot, there's a lot of symbolism involved. Meaning, well, Saturn represents your father as far as the planetary component, and Jupiter represents expansion and this and that and whatnot. And there's all these archetypal things that are in play, and that's good. But the problem is there's way too much room for interpretation, and you can make anything just fit with about anything that you want. And me having the scientific background of being a clinician and having participated in research throughout graduate school and beyond, I couldn't cozy up to that. But VA is different because in vibrational astrology, every planet regulates one particular process, and that's it. So with the example of Saturn, Saturn, people say it could be rough times, could represent the father, could represent hard times, challenges, all this sort of stuff. And it might, but in VA, here's what the research has validated. Saturn specifically has one function, and that's to strip things down to its essential form. Get rid of all the superfluous stuff, take away our toys, and help us see a situation for what it is. That's all Saturn does. Period. The end. Now, could some of those things involve relationships with your parents or father? Yeah, it could. But we work as vibrational astrologers within a very narrow guidelines as far as what each planet does, and no more, no less. And once I discovered that there was research being done in this field at a frantic pace, I might add, and there's stuff coming out, I was at a conference this past March where there was a whole bunch of research that was released that we can touch on a little later, where they're using controlled studies and they're using the same type of methodology like they use in genetic research, such as extreme case sampling and again, gathering evidence and looking at the evidence-based without cherry picking your data on the front end. It's like, this feels like home. So the idea behind VA, other than each planet regulating a specific process, is that each planet also has its own vibration to it. So this is where it kind of blends into the world of physics, paranormal, spirituality, sacred geometry, where everything comes back to vibration. And I'm assuming you're online a lot. You're probably on TikTok and some of these other things. How many times you scroll through the feed and everyone's talking vibration, vibration, vibration? It's everywhere.
I mean, it's not the first episode of this show in 140 episodes recorded that it's come up, vibrations come up. That's for damn sure.
Exactly. So the idea with vibrational astrology is every planet, in addition to regulating a process, has its own unique vibrational pattern, just like in music, different notes. Okay. So when you have certain notes or planets that form these angular distances around different parts of the sky, and how those elements interact with our own natal planets in our own birth chart, the idea and the theory in VA is that these vibrations that occur either set the stage for things to sail through smoothly, have certain opportunities arise, maybe make other opportunities not as optimal at certain times. And it's a matter of understanding these vibrational patterns and how they're impacting human behavior, unlike the old way of astrology, which is as is above, so is below. And, you're handed your fate and it's dictated to you and that's it. That's not how we think from a vibrational astrology perspective. Gives us information, but we have free will and we can choose to ignore it or not. The vibrations are still going to be there one way or another, but whether we choose to implement, act on, or incorporate that in our day-to-day decision-making, well, that's entirely up to us.
Exactly. I mean, it's like going to the doctor. People can either listen to the doctor and actually get healthier, or they can not listen to the doctor and just end up passing away sooner. So, I mean, it's basically like, it's the same as any profession. You either listen to a professional or you're going to screw yourself over in the long run. I mean, you listen to your lawyer, you might end up in prison. So, you know. But
that's a good way of putting it. Another way I like to look at astrology from my perspective is I liken it more to a weather report compared to a crystal ball. So a crystal ball, you look at the crystal ball and the scryer gazes in the ball and says, "Oh, I see a lot of money coming to you in your future." Okay, that's cool. If that pans out, great. Astrology is more like a weather report, meaning here are some optimal times when money might end up flowing to you more easily and freely if you put in the work to make that happen. Versus here's some other times when, you can put in the work, but it's not really going to produce because of the various aspects that are forming. It's not a good cycle. Bringing it back to that weather report analogy. Let's say you want to go to the beach this weekend. And you're all excited. You and your family are going to hop into the car, go down to the beach. But Friday night, you look at the weather report and it says torrential downpours scheduled for Saturday and Sunday. Well, guess what? You could still go to the beach if you want. It's probably not going to be a good time, but there's nothing keeping you from going to the beach. And there's nothing making you go to the beach either. And if we take that weather report and then go back to the farmer, if he or she wanted to, could plant crops in the middle of December. They're not going to grow, but they could do it. Instead, they look at when is the optimal time to plant crops. Well, the spring. Why? Well, because the thaw is gone and the temperatures come up. And when we look at astrology through that lens, it starts to take away a lot of that woo-woo type stuff and say, oh, all right, well, this is much more practical than what is often interpreted at a very surface level.
Exactly. And I mean, the way you keep describing the difference between good and bad astrology, it's funny because I had a psychic on here months ago who she actually wrote a book about the same thing, but as far as psychics go, like it's called the Old Brick Road to Psychics. And it's basically like good versus bad psychics. Like, and there's a lot of similarities between like a good bad psychic and a good bad astrologer. Like they're kind of in the same field in a way almost.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely under the umbrella of divination or forecasting or whatever you want to assign it. But you're right. There are some really good psychics and I've met them and had readings from them. And then there are some really bad psychic who it's like, my cat could be more psychic than you. What are you doing?
I mean, yeah, I like to preclude it because like I grew up in the 90s. So the way I always describe it is when I was a kid, you would see those random small buildings here and there that would say like psychic readings, palm readings, stuff like that. And, like I was brought up to believe they were all just cuckoo. That they were all it was all woo-woo stuff that like anybody could assume it. I mean, I saw John Edwards on TV as a kid and like I could tell right away this dude's like South Park actually put it correctly, he's the biggest douche in the universe. But I mean, so with astrology, like I was kind of brought up the same way. Like it just I mean, which I would like to apologize, especially to my previous guests, because I know I've had astrologers on now that I'm thinking about it. I was thinking astrology versus astronomy for some reason. And so
we do need to know a little bit of astronomy to be a good astrologer, but astronomers know a lot more about the cosmos than we do.
I would assume, but so I mean, yeah, as far as this, I mean, I've had astrologers on my show before. I've actually had my birth chart read in this show before, and I mean, I'm like you. I love readings. Almost every medium psychic on the show I have, like if they want to give me a reading, I always am like, yes, please. But because I I've been told a lot of things through multiple mediums that line up, and they're all good. They're all good mediums. I never have had a bad medium on my show, thank the Lord, because at least not to my opinion, I haven't. They all could tell me things at the end of the show randomly that I didn't expect to come out of them, and that sometimes had to do with things like that were around me at that moment, and I was getting a feeling, and it just like they confirmed what I felt. So, to me, there's that difference. Like, how can you tell a good astrologer versus a bad astrologer? Like, what are the signs that someone that is doing like astrology that just is bullshit in a way?
Okay. So one of the first things that I always say, if someone's looking for an astrologer, and astrologer, and I'm going to just let's make an assumption that we're dealing with qualified, credible astrologers versus someone who read a book or pamphlet and they're calling themselves an astrologer. So let's say someone's got some training, they put in the time or what have you, and that there's at least a baseline level of competence there. One of the first things is, how do you feel when you're interacting with them? And even if that means you haven't spoken with them, what's the vibe you get from their website? What's the vibe you get from maybe watching YouTube videos or podcasts or what have you? If they rub you the wrong way, that's not the person for you. It doesn't mean that astrology isn't for you, but it means that person isn't for you, because there's lots of different people in the world and there's lots of different astrologers, and not everyone's going to click with every person. I always also recommend to folks, if I'm lecturing on the subject, be wary of any astrologer who doesn't respect or welcome questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because anyone who says this is the way it is because it's the way it's been handed down to me by someone else, I got a problem with that. Because one of the things that attracted me to the VA world is we welcome questions. The model's constantly changing. It's getting better, and we're refining things over time. And we want to hear questions like, well, I had that reading before with someone else, and they indicated such and such, and you're saying this. Explain the disparity. How could that be? So you want to make sure that whomever is open, whoever you're reading, considering having a reading with, or just exploring, that things aren't based in dogma, because it's changing, man. I mean, the whole idea of energy now, just not too long ago, they managed to do that. I always get them confused, fission or fusion with the cycler. They generated more energy than what they used to produce it. That's a big deal. They've determined that particles, if you take one over here that's separated from the one that's over here and they were related, there's an impact from one to the other. We're just beginning to find out a bunch of stuff. And I think science is finally catching up with some of the tenets of astrology that have been out there over the years. And it's also saying, you know what? Maybe some things that we thought of don't make sense. Here's an example. In VA, the signs have much less of an emphasis than what is out there in the general population and what you see online. In other words, birth signs, like, are you an Aries, a Taurus, a Cancer, a Gemini? Yeah, all right, that's part of who we are. But even the signs and house cusps, as far as where those signs are placed, what the research has shown is that they may give us a little bit of flavoring as to how someone behaves or how they do something or how that carries through their overall presence or way of being. But it's the planets that really pack the punch. So that's a pretty recent discovery within the past 10 years. Now, if you go and seek out a traditional astrologer who hasn't looked at the data or hasn't looked at VA or anything, they're going to say, oh, that's nonsense. Hey, it's all about the signs. All right, well, show me the data. Show me the research, because you can study this stuff. It's taken a while to get these models in place, but it can be studied. So, the idea of being open to an evolutionary type of process with astrology, that resonates with me. And I always encourage people to say, to get an idea, how comfortable is the astrologer they're dealing with questions? Because I don't claim to know everything. I certainly don't know everything. It's exciting times in the world of astrology, and you got to have a flexible way of reading the world, because if not, you're going to miss some key lessons that come out of the new studies and new research.
Of course. And I mean, So basically, astrology is like a map way to our lives, if I'm correct. Like it's just, I mean, I've had readings done, and some of the things they say are point on. Some of the things they said were, they could be hit or miss. It was just like a broad. That part was broad, and you can't really like define it down to like one part of your life at that point. And I mean, if I was gonna say I remember what they told me, I would be lying. But I'm personally working with a former guest right now who focuses on on maximizing your life basically, and like finding your true purpose in life. And I don't think she's not she's not an astrologer by any means. She doesn't call herself one, but she found she has a website where she actually found my life chart. And
Okay.
It relates to astrology in some way, I believe, but I'm not, no expert on either. So I'm not going to say they do relate, but it seems like they relate in some ways because it seemed very similar to the astrology reading I had. But so
yeah, and here's the thing: there's different levels of astrologers as well. Some people use it just as an adjunct to other modalities that they use. Others are more purists. That's all they use. I know going back to that conference, there's an individual in LA who is a licensed marriage and family therapy counselor who actually conducted some research on astro signatures and how those relate to the predisposition for addiction and substance abuse issues. So astrology is one of those things where you'll be very surprised to find some of the people who you wouldn't think be using astrology as part of their work actually using it. And I think that's pretty cool because in the VA world, come one, come all. The hardcore skeptics, as long as you have an open mind, come in. Those of you who've been doing traditional Western astrology, come on in. In this conference that I was at, there was a physicist in the room. There were there was a department head from a university. There were several other there were 2 engineers, 2 preachers, believe it or not. So it really is one of those things that has a space for everyone because VA does not postulate, well, you got to believe in VA and everything else goes out the window. I think, as I mentioned earlier, VA can coexist with higher dimensional planes, religion, spirituality, all these things, because in the end, it really is all connected.
it is. I mean, it is all connected. I mean, that's what the paranormal is all about, is that it's all connected, whether it be cryptids, extraterrestrials, spirits, it's all connected somehow. We don't know how.
Exactly. We're just now, as humans in 2023, beginning to get a little glimpse of what might be going on there, especially, with advances now in psychedelic research and whatnot. All this stuff is starting to converge. And if you step back and look at it, all this stuff 20, 30 years ago was so far on the fringe, people would just run you out of town if you mentioned it. Now, there's not a day that goes by when I don't see something come across my feed about psychedelics, which, was just, forget it. There was no value there. Now you got clinics popping up using psychedelic medicine. So everything's in motion, at least from my perspective.
Oh, I agree. I mean, you don't even know how many guest posts I see on podcast groups on Facebook about people who specialize in psychedelics, like looking to be on shows. Like it's an almost weekly thing, like seeing at least one person post. And I've actually hesitated to bring one on the show before, but you got me thinking I might need to like one that could talk to like the connection to the paranormal, of course. But I mean, I feel like I should bring one on at some point, like, because I've been resisting it. I mean, I've had people on before who can talk about psychedelics to some degree, but they're not like the experts out there on it. They're not doing it as a career. It's just a side thing or they did psychedelics at a younger age, and that's why they can do the things they can do. Yeah. I mean, it opens you up. It opens you up, and sometimes the door doesn't shut,
Well, yeah. And psychedelics, I would imagine, I'm by no means an expert in that field. I just, I consume a lot of research, so I'm always looking at stuff. It's probably just like any other thing, like we've discussed, astrology or anything else. You got your dabblers, but then you got those who are on the clinical side, who may be treating people in a controlled clinical setting. I know Oregon, I think, since they relaxed their rules, that's probably one of the forefronts of where that's happening. And that would be a fascinating interview to hear, someone who's working with this stuff in a way where they've, again, got some controls in place and are using it not just to go take a trip, but have an ultimate destination in mind as far as being used in a clinical type of context. And, you and I even having this conversation probably 10 years ago, people would have just said, well, who are those nuts? But not anymore. I mean, things are moving.
10 years ago, people would have said that about most episodes of this podcast. That's for sure. I mean, the paranormal world isn't more open now than it was. I got out of it for a good 15 years because there was nobody else that was really into it. And it just, if you talk about Bigfoot or aliens to a normal person back in the early 2000s, late 2000s, like, you just seem like a weirdo. So, I got out of the paranormal field for a long time just because I just didn't look for the books anymore. And I didn't watch any more of the shows. Like, it just dropped out of my mind for a while, but then I started hearing podcasts about it, and that's what got me back into it. But I mean, so it's the same thing with the paranormal. Like, it's become more normal, and which is the point of the name of the show. It's becoming the new normal,
right?
Like, you ask 10 people if they had experience with anything paranormal or supernatural, and 8 out of 10 are going to say something.
Yeah,
whether it be just like you feeling a presence in the room to, oh, I was abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
Because there are thousands and millions of people that have been abducted by aliens at this point. And I'd like more of them to come on the show, just putting it out there. You put out, you manifest what you put out. So I'd like more to come on the show. But
let me, you mentioned that those sort of like paranormal experiences. Let me share one with you that was actually very personal. I've never shared this publicly. So this is the first time you'll hear this. And I've thought about this a lot to myself, but haven't really vocalized it. So this is going back many, many years ago. I remember when I went to my sister's graduation from college. And I remember, being there at the ceremony, and there's, thousands of people all around or what have you. And unfortunately, one of the people in her class, she didn't know this person because it was a large class, a couple of thousand people.
Of course.
The woman had actually passed away while earning her degree. And they let her daughter, who must have been probably 4 to 6 years old, walk across the stage and pick up the degree posthumously on behalf of the mother. It was a very sweet moment.
Oh, I was going to say that's very sweet.
Okay. But that's not the paranormal part. Okay. And it was very touching. There was not a dry eye in the place, and everyone was focused on that, and, give a roaring round of applause and what have you. So then, you're driving away, you're leaving the place, all these cars, it's like leaving a concert. Okay. So, and, I'm in the car with my parents, and I don't know, someone was having a disagreement about something, and there's all this chatting. Oh, no, we can't go there for lunch. There's going to be too many people, and blah, 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 all this stuff. So there's all this banter going on. I look out of the corner of my eyes at just the right moment. And this is after being in the car 20 minutes navigating the parking lot. Who do I see? This little girl and her family. And she's just skipping along in her little white dress, kind of going into the family's car. And I just happened to look up at the right time, and I saw her there. And I said to myself, what are the odds? Because it was like, it got me right here. It was like, what are the chances that I'd see this kid at that moment? Because there were, I'm telling you, thousands of people around, thousands of cars. And that's always stuck with me. Someone said, have you ever seen an angel? I said, that's probably the closest I've ever come. It was just thinking about it now, it was pretty wild. I can't really put it into words, but I think you get what I'm putting down as far as just, it was one of those things that it was very out of the ordinary in a very positive way, but it was pretty memorable.
That right there is what we in the paranormal field like to call synchronicity.
Yeah.
Because you see something that just lines up perfectly, and it's like the probability of seeing that is just so low. And especially, it's a college graduation. There were, like you said, there are thousands of people there. Like,
it was insanity. And that's what struck me so much, because the moment on stage when this girl went up there, it was just very touching. And then it was almost like, oh, well, the universe said, well, you like that? I'm going to give you a little more. And I was like, what the hell is this? In the best way possible, but very, very memorable to this day. I often wonder what happened to her, because this is going back 20 years now. The kids probably all grown up and graduated college herself, but it left an imprint.
These type of things do. And I've done full episodes on synchronicity before, and it's just incredible. Like, and it relates to astrology because it's the universe planning things out to work certain ways, whether you expect it or not. I mean, but you mentioned about like people going to astrology for financial reasons earlier. So what are the main reasons people go to astrology? I mean, I've had some of the readings. So like I've had spammers on Instagram ask me like, I want to give you a reading. Which of these topics would you like a reading in? Like, that's when they get blocked, but
right. Yeah, exactly. So, it runs the gamut. I'll have people find me and book a reading just to kind of see what it's like. Never had a reading before. I want to know. Okay. Now, some people have said when you hold someone's astrology chart in your hands, you've got their whole life right there, their past, present, and future. So you kind of need to narrow the scope a little bit, so, well, what specifically should I focus on? And generally, we'll do the most common things, relationships, about this, that, whatnot. So that's on one end of the continuum. On the other end, some people will show up with very specific personal questions. One is, I'm really contemplating starting a new business. I'm interested in getting up and running in 2024. Can you give me an idea on what the ramp up's going to be like, the time period ahead of that, during it, and then shortly after, so I can figure out if this is indeed the right time, or maybe I need to move up or move back a few weeks or months. So that's a very common piece. Other times it gets even more personal. I think my spouse is having an affair, or I'm having an affair. The person will come to me and say, I need to know if this is going to go somewhere and what's going to happen. It's never up for me to say, do this, don't do that, whatever. People have free will. My job is to say, here's what the planetary energies and cycles are putting out there. And then you need to dial that into where you're at and make sense and make a decision as to what makes the most sense for you. So the long answer to your question is it ranges from the mundane to sometimes very, very personal. And what's interesting is people will come to me, and not just me, but any astrologer who's been around a while and who's got a credible reputation, and they will divulge things that they have told no one else, including therapists and spouses. And part of, being a professional astrologer is a code of ethics. I've been told so many secrets, but thankfully, building upon my background in clinical psychology, and when I was doing that sort of work, confidentiality is first and foremost. I don't disclose anything to anyone that happens in a reading. It just doesn't happen because it has to be a safe place for people to be able to speak candidly so that we can look at it and work through. So I've had some interesting stuff over the years. Thankfully nothing that borders on illegal, because there's two things I don't work with. I don't work with anything where someone's trying to cover up something illegally. I'm not getting involved with that. Thank you very much. Bad karma for number one. And, I don't need to be a co-conspirator, number two. And I don't do health stuff because I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm not about to embark upon that path. Not to say that astrology can't be helpful there. In fact, there have been over the years several medical astrologers who were also medical doctors, and they're certainly qualified to deal with that. But anything else short of those two issues, I've probably had it at one point or another where people need some insight.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you said makes sense. 100%. It does. I wouldn't want to deal with legal stuff either. I mean, I know psychics who have helped the cops before you, and I'm like, and I mean, they won't talk about like the cases they work with the cops. Like they won't talk about it because they don't want to reveal stuff. But I have to ask, have you done anything as far as like people who say they've been abducted by aliens or they're star seeds and they come to you?
Not yet. I mean, that may happen tomorrow. But I have had people say, a lot of people have said that they've had out of body experiences. That's very frequent. They've either, whether it's in dream state or whether they're sitting in their recliner and they see themselves floating, but not to the point where they've, been, have a extraterrestrial encounter or an abductee or anything like that. But one of the things that you're taught early on is these are people's realities. I'm not judging. You can come and tell me anything you want, as long as, you didn't commit a murder or anything else that could inflict harm on somebody else, and you're not going to get judgment. Now I'm not a mandatory reporter like therapists and counselors are, but if someone does come to me and says that they've been up to some nefarious activity that involves other people, and thankfully that hasn't happened yet, but especially if they're causing harm to someone else, I would probably end up having to report that, because I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Especially if they were inflicting harm on someone else.
Which, I mean, yeah, he doesn't want no Michael Corleone's coming up and saying, "Hey, I need the best way to hide this body. What's the way I'm gonna go with that?"
You need to go. So you need to call somebody else, like the cops. Don't bother me.
Exactly. So, we talked about what people come to you for typically, but is there a certain like genre of people that come to you? Like, is it a certain like personality type?
That's a very interesting question, because one of the things that you probably saw online is, I'm for 25 years, I've also been a corporate personality profiler. So I know personality inside and out. And the interesting thing about people who consult in astrology is there is no core demographic. You would be surprised. Devout, religious folks who would never admit in public that they would see an astrologer, very common. People who have very high positions in corporations or in public institutions. Every walk of life you can imagine. I mean, people think, oh, they're going to find out. Astrologers deal with people who are just trying to find out about, love, romance, or money. No, it goes way beyond that. Any type of, so you've got, anyone from professionals to, and forget about the genders. It's equally distributed. You'll got people who are on Wall Street trying to get a little edge on the stock situation. You've got people who are stay-at-home domestic workers, other people who are business travelers. I haven't had any heads of state, but I know fellow astrologers who have had heads of state come to them. And that's something I learned early on too. You can't ever, as an astrologer, make a judgment as to whether or not someone's going to be into astrology or not. Here's an example. I had lunch with somebody within the past year who I could have sworn up and down the last thing they wanted to hear about was astrology. And I knew they knew that I did this work because they found me on, I've known this person. They've been in my life for eons, but I know their background and whatnot. And it's like, there's no way this person's going to want to know anything about that. And I don't force it on people. I don't bring it up. But if someone asks, I'm all in because I love the subject. That's all we talked about for the hour and 30-minute lunch. And it just blew me out of the water because I thought certainly this individual will have no interest. So it cuts across every genre, gender, religious background, black, white, doesn't matter. Everybody under the sun, you get a little cross section of the population there.
Which makes sense in a thousand ways. But I mean, I could see that because I mean, it's everything nowadays in the paranormal world, whether it be astrology, psychics, mediums, clairaudience, clairvoyance, like take your pick. Like they all are seeing these range of people from every race and creed come to every profession, come to them. And I mean, it's kind of scary almost, but I'll ask this. Okay, well, the main question I'm going to ask is why do you think there's been such a burst in the popularity of all these different paranormal fields in the last, say, well, we'll predate COVID. We'll go back to like 2015-ish.
Well, that's a question that's postulated quite often, and I don't think I have a solid answer for you, but I have some theories. I think people are finally expanding their horizons from beyond just organized religion that's been handed down to them. And I'm not going after religion before those folks come after me. I always got somebody aggravated with me. So I just want to preempt that. Right?
Oh, trust me. I got to religion in this show plenty. So don't.
Okay. Well, that's fine. And that's cool. But I'm not going that hardcore, but I think people have been limited over the years of being able to explore. And now just to get astrological just for a second, Pluto has moved into Aquarius. It's going to move back. And I know we don't talk much about signs, but in this case, this is more of a mega trend thing because it's affecting everyone. It's going to go back into Capricorn for a few months for the remainder of this year, then back into Aquarius for many years after that. And that's all about dropping down the barriers to information. So we've been building toward this for a while. Information is now democratized. Things that were kept away from people to have access to, now you can just go Google stuff and pull it up immediately. So I think there's a collective conscious shift for people who want to explore and want to understand things more than they may have up till this point. And then you mentioned COVID. There was a huge surge in COVID because uncertainty always fuels people wanting to figure out and kind of see beyond the present in all sorts of methods, whether it's astrology or psychics or numerologists or whatever. So I think it's a combination of things. Society is evolving and people are realizing, well, if you see an astrologer, you're not doing some sort of satanic goat sacrifice in your basement. It's not that, we're looking at data. We're looking at, and then when I pull up a chart and people read it, you've seen charts, so you know where I'm going here. It's like, oh my gosh, look at all the math and the angles and this and that. It's very complicated. Yeah, it is. Astrology is more math and geometry than it is anything else. And there's a lot of information that's there. So I say all that to mention that I think people are just becoming more curious and they have the permission now based on society, or they're giving themselves permission to explore and kind of look under the hood and see what's going on. I mean, I have a good friend who is a legitimate paranormal investigator, been doing this work for 20 years. And he said too, he's recognized over the years, just the type of people who will call him if they think they have some activity in a home or whatnot. It's much more mainstream now than what it would have been 10, 15 years ago, where it might've been someone, who had an affinity for the paranormal. Now it could be John and Susie Milquetoast who lives down the street who hears rumblings in the attic at night, and they've ruled out anything mechanical and they want to see what's going on up there.
Exactly. I mean, I'm the prime example of that, because I used to be one of those people who anytime a house made noise, I'd be like, or I heard something in the house, I'd be like, oh, it's the house settling, like blah blah blah. But I mean, yada yada yada, whatever. Right. But it's just now, like, as soon as the house I moved into had something going on, because I listened to the paranormal podcast, I'm like, let's get some investigators in here. And I had some investigators come in for free, and they did a full investigation, took a couple hours, and there's either one or two ghosts living in my house, and they don't bother me too much, so I don't bother them.
That's my philosophy. I've never had an encounter that I would know of in my home, but it's like, hey, if there's a couple taking up residence here, that's cool. You do your thing, I'll do mine, and there's plenty of room for everybody. I don't want to upset anyone or anything. As long as we can each have our own space, that's cool.
I mean, we did have an incident a couple weeks ago where we were out shopping and the back door when we came home was open. I don't know whether it was an actual living human being or something otherworldly, but our camera showed nobody coming in the kitchen. And I mean, if you're going to come in our back door, you're going to walk in the kitchen to go to the living room and see what you can get if you're a human.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know. It was just weird. It was just a very weird thing, and I can't explain it. But I mean, my wife watched the cameras for a long time because she was convinced that someone broke in the house, because there's been reports of that around this area lately. But we couldn't find anything. And I mean, and she swears she shut it and locked it, and I believe her because the camera shows her going back into the kitchen to lock the door before we leave.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's weird.
Well, do you find in your experience that some entities are mischievous and just like to play around a little bit?
I've done that. I just released the episode with Nancy Mello, a pet communicator, a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Or a week ago, maybe even. And she has a story about ghosts like that, like to play jokes on her. Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely something I've heard of. I mean, ghosts, or whether they be poltergeist or even demons that like to play jokes on people, like that's different. Who knows? It could be any of those things. But as far as astrology goes, so I mean, the question so let me ask you this, because you're in astrology and you deal with space. Do you believe there's a chance that extraterrestrials live among us, since, as you said, we now have the information, because the government finally released the information, that they have things they can't explain going on?
Right. I believe nothing's off the table. I believe there's a lot more that we don't know than what we do know. And to make sweeping statements like, well, there's no chance of, there could be a chance of anything. And here's what I think, and this is just my personal intuitive gut prediction. I think in the next 5 years, we're going to be unearthing discoveries, or at least getting information that may have been held back, that's just going to blow our minds in the next 5 years. I'm not talking 10, 15, 20. Yeah, more will come there. But I think a lot of stuff is about to just enter into our consciousness. And I think everything's up for grabs, because, you know, when you've got physics now proving out things that have been said that have been impossible for so many decades. And it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe we spoke too soon. Kind of opens the door for, you know, we don't know. So I think anything is possible. Do they walk among us? Maybe. I mean, you know, if you follow Bashir, he claims to be one. Do you know Bashir?
Off the top of my head, I don't, and I feel ashamed I don't. But
so it's all right. Now he's a purported time traveler from I forget what year it says he's from, but you should look him up. I think it's Bashir.org.
Now that you say that, I kind of think I do know.
Yeah, he's a little snarky. You know, he's got a little bit of a sense of humor to him. Interesting dude. You know, so it's like, and here's the thing. Here's how I like to look at that stuff. Let's assume, and I'm not saying this, but let's assume that Bashir is just total full of nonsense, okay? And that he's not much of a time traveler as the mailman is. What's interesting is he does have some very salient ideas that could be put into action. Some interesting ways of looking at the world that actually wouldn't cause harm to people and actually would help improve communication or improve the way that we get along. So my thought is, time traveler or not, I think everyone, assuming they've got in their heart to do some good, they may bring some unconventional information along. Information may come out of them through an unconventional method or manner, but they may have something to say that could be valuable.
I agree 100%. And I mean, yeah, I just had a guest on a couple weeks ago. The episode hasn't released yet. It's not going to release till probably end of June, July. But it's a publisher for a book written by an author who passed away, but the author was supposedly a vampiric reptilian. And according to the book, the world is going to end in 2025. It's going to be an apocalypse as we just find the word apocalypse.
Okay.
Now, I mean, whether that's true or not, I could never know. I will find out in 2 years. I'll find out in a year and a half.
Soon enough.
I'll find out in a year and a half, 2 years, like everybody, or 2.5 years, whatever. But I mean, but let me ask you this, because this is kind of the follow-up to that last question I asked. I've talked a lot on this show to people about spiritual awakening. Like, there's been a spiritual awakening since, some say 2008, some say 2015, like, I mean, not 2008, 2012 or 2015. Like, the numbers differ based on who you talk to. But do you believe this is a thing? Like, the spiritual awakening has happened?
Well, it depends on how are we defining spiritual awakening? Because basically, I think that's key.
People, I mean, the layman definition I like to use is just people becoming more aware of the spiritual world, the paranormal world, people like just opening themselves up to the possibility of, like we talked about earlier, everything, whether it be astrology, mediumship, or what have you. I mean, just anything that people are more, it's not just, oh, I go to church every Sunday, even though I probably break 10 commandments, all 10 commandments during the week. I go to church every Sunday and I'm a good person because of it. Like, people have left that mindset.
I think we're heading in that direction. You know, as far as is it a watershed moment, and is it all happening now, or did it happen, or is it going to happen? I think it's more of a gradual drip. But I think, I mean, just look at what is popular now, and the way to do this is you see what's out there on social media. I've been on social media since the beginning. I've been on the internet since the beginning. I'm old. So I've seen things evolve over time. And I have never seen so much spiritual content online in any context, whether it's blogs or websites or social media, than I've ever had currently. So I think we're certainly heading in that direction, because I think people are tired of being told this is the way it is. and people are curious and they're asking questions and people are figuring out what works for them. And I think that's great because, hey, if you're the type of person who goes to church every Sunday and does your thing, good for you. Don't force me to go, but knock yourself out. That's your thing. Other people are like, I don't need a building. I could be spiritual in a field with a little meditative music and just kind of chill out. That's cool too. So I think it's what's happening is the modalities now are becoming more democratized and demystified from the standpoint of people can try on different things and see what resonates best with them without fear of being stigmatized or being labeled as a nut. Although, there's always going to be some of that. I know, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode here, when I tell someone I'm an astrologer, I brace myself for the recoil. It bothered me originally. It's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. If it's not your thing, that's cool. I get it. I'm not going to force it on you. But if you're interested, then, let's talk until the wee hours because it's just a fascinating subject that has no end to it. Someone once said, in fact, the founder of modern vibrational astrology, David Cochran, he said, astrology is like a mansion with 1,000 rooms. You can never get to all of them. And it's if you let that sink in, it's like, that's amazing. There's a lot to the field. And that's what keeps it fresh and interesting.
I agree 100%. I mean, and for a good example, a girl I went to church with my whole childhood, literally the same birthday as me, same age, everything. She is now a tarot card reader, and I see her online constantly doing tarot card readings. She's also into witchcraft or Wicca, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And I mean, I never would have seen it when we were younger because she was the most devout church girl ever. She sang in the choir, and I'm pretty sure she still does. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she still does to this day. And I mean, it right there is a definition of defying a world because I never would have seen it coming. Like it never would have. And and doing this podcast alone, I know so many people that are into this that I see. So I get invited to join groups all the time where it's paid tarot and paid psychic readings. I'm just like, yeah, I'm not joining, but go do your thing. I'm not going to join, but go do your thing.
Yeah. You bring something up that I've never really put this to paper or done extensive research, but I will tell you this: I've got this theory that I've held for years, and I refer to it as snap theory. And this is my definition of that snap theory. There may be a more refined version out there someplace. But this is my idea of snap theory. Everything's a continuum. All right. So let's say you've got the church goer over here and you've got the astrologer over here. Okay. If someone spends an inordinate amount of time over here, let's say going to church, they go to church, on the weekends and during the week and the this and that. And eventually they're going to snap to the other end of the continuum. My fingers are all messed up because I'm seeing myself in reverse, but you get the idea where they're going to bounce to the other side of that. I've seen that happen with people who were academic screw ups through grade school and high school, and they graduate cum laude at university. I've seen it the other way. The bookworm ends up, God forbid, getting involved with drugs and they never make it out of college. You've seen devout, spiritual people, religious people end up speaking against religion. The other thing. So I wonder, you mentioning that just is sort of like another case study for me to plug into the snap theory idea that I've had rattling around my brains. And it's not just someone who's interested in a topic, but they're immersed. They are so steeped in it that I think eventually they hit a saturation point that boom, catapults them to the other side. But they say, that's it. I've had enough. But just some thoughts rattling around my head.
And it makes sense. I mean, so whether the world ends in 2025 or not, we don't know yet. We don't know. We're not going to know until 2025 because that's the way the world works. We can't predict these things. No one really can. You can just say you maybe get a feeling. You may. I mean, this guy's supposed to be heard from reptilians that it's going to end 2025 because that's when there's going to be a big battle between different alien species. But which, I mean, if that happens, I wouldn't be too surprised. Not at all. But not at all. But I mean, this has been an amazing conversation, and I can't wait for my listeners to hear this episode.
Oh, excellent. Well, I've enjoyed it. This has been fascinating. This is excellent. I thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And to all my listeners, you'll be hearing this. By the time you hear this, it'll be July probably, but you'll enjoy it when you hear it. I know that. But Michael, where can they find you if they want to find out more about you or enlist your services? Where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So it's real easy. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, so it's real easy to find me online. BlueRidgeAstrology.com. That's BlueRidgeAstrology.com. And on the social sites, Insta, Facebook, TikTok, same moniker, Blue Ridge, and YouTube, BlueRidgeAstrology.com. Put a lot of content out there for free. You can also see what services I have to offer in regards to readings and astrology reports on the website. And I'm happy to. In fact, what I'll do is I am going to create a special link or a special promo code for your listeners, and that's PARA, PARA, short for paranormal, PARA. If you use that code at checkout, PARA, PARA, that'll get you 20% off of any personal consultation with me. And I'll leave that, we'll coordinate when this goes live, and I'll leave it up for about a month. It won't be out there in perpetuity, but if you put that in, that's a thank you for having me on your show and a little something for your listeners.
Yeah, as soon as I have a lot of backlog edits still, but as soon as I get to
whenever, yeah, you'll get with me and let me know. That's all good.
Yeah, I'll let you know when the release date will be. But to all my listeners, you know where you can find me. If you're a new listener and you don't know by this episode, which means you haven't listened to the old episode, shame on you.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, then you listen to the outro I put in. You'll know where you can find me. But I want to thank Michael for coming on because it's been an amazing show, and this has been one of our more serious scientific shows, and I love those. Those to me are more. They almost are a relief from the comedy that we do like so often on the show. Like, I mean, not that we do comedy really, but
no, I understand. It's good to look at it from all points. You know, you need it all. It's a whole 360-degree feedback loop. You need the fun, the science, the comic relief, and everything
exactly.
else.
I mean, those are the me and another podcast episodes because that's when it goes wild. But we go down every wormhole you can imagine.
There you go.
I want to thank all my listeners for listening, and I will see you all in half a week. Until then, remember, go see an astrologist, one that's actually a good astrologist, and figure out what can help your life at this point. It might do you some good. But until next time, we thank you all for listening. You can find me on Facebook as Jeremy Bryant, or you can find me as Uncensored, Unapologetic, and Untamed UQ Podcast Collective Facebook group. You can find me on Twitter and the Instagram as @JugglerBastard, or should I say X now. And you can find me on TikTok as @JugglerBastard Podcast. You can also find me on YouTube as Paranormal The New Normal. And you can also find me streaming on YouTube as Blind Knowledge Network, because all knowledge is blind until they admit Bigfoot exists.